Hello, my name is Emily Robinson, and I currently attend Utah State University. This video is part of my essay journal assignment for the History 3850 course, The History of Utah. I will be answering question number 4 in the essay journal assignment. It inquires, why is an understanding of Mormons' history and theology important and justified for Utah history? Who exactly were the Mormons? The Mormons were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This church played an influential and highly important role in Utah's history. Their beliefs were unique in many respects, and they influenced Utah's path to gaining statehood. One of the most controversial Mormon beliefs was in plural marriage. In August of 1852, Orson Pratt said that Mormon men could marry more than one woman. Almost every other person of Christian faith looked down their noses in horror at this news. Mormons received hatred and anger based on their practice of polygamy. In fact, the Republican Party had recently come out with a political campaign that denounced the twin relics of barbarism, which were polygamy and slavery. Later, in 1890, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints denounced the practice. The Mormons also believed in the Word of Wisdom. The Word of Wisdom forbids strong drink and was a revelation given to Joseph Smith, a Mormon prophet. As most of the world frequently enjoys the consumption of alcohol, this peculiar belief came as a shock to many and still does today. Based on their peculiar beliefs, the state of Utah struggled to gain the statehood that they so eagerly sought. By recognizing the theology of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have a stronger understanding of the conflict that began between the United States government and the Utahns. But Mormons were influential in several other ways as well. The Mormons, led by Brigham Young, were the first people, other than the Native Americans, to settle permanently in the Salt Lake Valley. They came to Utah in handcarts and covered wagons in droves, eager to reach their destination. While crossing the plains, the pioneers experienced terrible hardship that influenced their work ethic and way of life once they arrived. Mormon settlers' hardships were not over after crossing the treacherous plains. When they arrived in Utah, there was not enough food and resources to sustain the hundreds of Mormons that continued to fill the valleys. The settlers didn't have experience in hunting and gathering because they solely focused on domestic agriculture and grazing animals. Some of the native peoples in the area took pity on the Mormons and began to show them various plants that could be eaten, such as the sego lily and milkweed plant. Once the winter had passed, hunger persisted as a cloud of crickets descended on the crops in the spring. Eventually, the cloud dispersed as seagulls plunged into the ever-growing crowd of crickets, snatching them up into their beaks. This allowed the Mormon settlers to properly begin tilling the fertile land. It is important to recognize the Mormons for their establishment of roads and towns in our state's history. Brigham Young encouraged the Mormons to create a grid system for society. This grid system was organized to allow for easy travel. Temple Square was in the center and homes were built outside the town. The leaders distributed land and water rights to the settlers. The plots were divided into 5 and 10 acres of land each. The members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints also established irrigation channels. The water system was designed in such a way that everyone could receive a little bit of water to irrigate their crops even during times of drought. Pictured here are the Uinta Mountains. An interesting fact about Utah is that it receives almost all of its water for the... Eventually, Brigham Young sent organizations of people away from the Salt Lake City area. He made sure that each group had a diverse skill set that would allow them to build prosperous communities. These groups of people settled in places such as Cache Valley, St. George, Cedar City, and many other areas. We owe a lot to those early Utahns. In 1857, many immigrants were traveling to California. They were hoping to raise cattle and prosper there. Thousands of these travelers passed through Utah on their way to California and bought supplies, food, and other necessities from the Mormons. They also used Utah land to let their cattle graze. This angered many of the Native Americans because the immigrants were hurting the land that they so desperately needed to provide for themselves. Frequent skirmishes broke out between the immigrants and the Native Americans. The Mormons became peacemakers, calming down both sides and ending conflict. The Native Americans faced other problems with the immigrants. Some immigrant trains were reckless in their actions as they traveled. M.W. Buster's train shot every Native American they could see. Consequently, the Native Americans were outraged. At one point, a member of the train told the Native Americans that Brigham Young was going to slit their throats and take their women and children. Another problem arose when immigrants presented an ox that had died in the night to local Native Americans. Little did anyone know, the meat likely contained a disease called anthrax. It was reported that 6 Native Americans died and many others were seriously ill. Anthrax was not well known at the time, and thus the Native Americans concluded that the immigrants had poisoned the ox. When Brigham Young heard of the lies that were told to the Native Americans and the lives that had been taken, he immediately acted to restore calm. Brigham Young was the U.S. Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Utah Territory. He sent flour, potatoes, corn, cattle, fruit, and ammunition to Native American leaders in hopes that the gifts would restore peace. The Mormons' history is deeply intertwined in the history of Utah. It is important to recognize the Mormon beliefs because it allows historians to understand and recognize the impact of their beliefs on the state. Mormon theology made it challenging for Utah to gain statehood. It also affected the way roads were built, how irrigation systems run, the settlements, and the people that live in Utah today. Relationships with the Native Americans were also greatly affected by the Mormon settlers. It is unfathomable to imagine teaching Utah history without fostering an understanding of the Mormons' history and theology, because they are just too closely connected. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for the sources used in the creation of this video.